The story of Joshua begins with Abraham, who becomes the father of a new nation. From here, he becomes the father of Isaac, and Isaac becomes the father of Jacob, and Jacob becomes the father of Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his brothers and ends up in Egypt. During Joseph's time in Egypt, he goes from slave to prisoner to interpreter of dreams to Pharaoh in the land of Goshen. During this time, there is a great prosperity in Egypt, followed by a great famine in the entire region. This forces Jacob's family into Egypt, where they reconcile and are reunited with Joseph. But after Joseph dies and a new pharaoh rises in Egypt, they see the growing Israelite population as a threat and oppress and enslave them for over 400 years. This is where Moses comes in and the story of the Exodus begins. Moses, a Hebrew, is raised among the Egyptians as one of their own, but goes into exile after killing an Egyptian who severely beat a Hebrew slave. Moses then lives in Midian for decades until he is called by God to lead his people out of Egypt and into the Promised Land. While fleeing from the approaching Egyptian army, God splits the Red Sea, and Moses and the Israelites cross into the Sinai wilderness. Here God gives Moses and the Israelites the law, but the people engage in idolatry, sexual immorality, and decades of groanings against God, and thus that generation is barred from entering the Promised Land. During this time, a new generation comes about, and Moses chooses Joshua to be the new leader of Israel once he passes. Joshua instructs the people to follow and stay true to the Torah, or law that God has given to them. With his new purpose, Joshua leads the Israelites out of the wilderness and from the east to the west, across the Jordan River and into Canaan, the Promised Land. Joshua, who is a great warrior, sends spies into Canaan ahead of the rest of the Israelites to survey and conduct reconnaissance in the land. From here, the Israelites are tested and experience fear, uncertainty, and at times faithlessness towards God's promise. In a case of faith, the walls came crashing down at Jericho, and the city was subdued when the priests circled the city blowing the shofar for 7 days. In a case of unfaithfulness, the Israelites suffered great loss at Ai when looting occurred. This is followed by 7 days of repentance for what happened. More battles and wars happened throughout the life of Joshua. God gives the people in Canaan the choice to follow him or to continue in their wickedness of idolatry, sexual immorality, and murder, specifically child sacrifice. God commands the Israelites not to intermarry with them and to drive them out of the land. Many of the Canaanites go against the God of Israel and are eventually defeated by the Israelite armies. When Joshua reaches old age and Canaan is conquered, he begins to address the Israelites and establishes his borders among the 12 tribes. Joshua tells them to remain faithful to God and to follow his commandments, otherwise they would face consequences.